Hey, what's up folks? Welcome back for another mandolin lesson. My name's David if you're new here, and today I want to show you the classic fiddle tune, Angeline the Baker. So this is a very popular bluegrass and old-time instrumental number, and a lot of people learn this as one of their very first tunes on the mandolin. So the version that I learned is really, really simple, and it goes something like this. And that's still really the core character of the melody. You know, it still sounds like Angeline the Baker, but when you hear other people play this tune in more advanced circles, it can sound something more like this. So in this lesson, we're gonna tackle both these arrangements. If you're coming to this tune for the very first time, no worries. We're gonna start with that very simple version of the melody. I'll show you how to play it with the transcription on screen as we go through this video. And then I'll show you how to play through that more complex version as well and break down some of the moving parts to show you what's going on. So hopefully you can take these same ideas to other tunes as well. So this is kind of a masterclass study on Angeline the Baker. Whenever you're ready, grab your mandolin and let's try some of this stuff out. Let's get down to the nitty-gritty here. We're gonna come over to the transcription and check out what's going on with the chords first. And by the way, if you're looking for a PDF copy of the transcriptions that you see on screen throughout this video, as well as those MP3 backing tracks that I'm playing to, you can find those over on my Patreon site. If you've seen any of my other videos, you know how this works, right? I've got all the stuff you need to learn this tune here on screen throughout this video, but if you want your own personal copies of these learning resources, you can find them over on Patreon. Check it out if you haven't already, and huge shout out to all the patrons over there. Thank you guys so much for your support. While we're at it, thanks so much for the likes and the subscribes to the channel, but let's check out the chorus to this song now. So, well, if you've already played this song before, you probably know that the chords are pretty straightforward, right? Depending on what jam you go to, you might find some different variations on this chord progression, but at the very basic level, this song only has 2 chords to it. Easy, right? We've just got our D chord and our G chord, and here are those 2 open chord shapes that I'd start with. If you've got these down, check out the chop chords as well. Here are the same chords with your chop shapes. And when you come over to the transcription, you see that things are even easier, right? Because look at the A section here. We just have one little G chord that happens on the 4th measure, but the rest of the part is just D major. And the exact same thing happens on the B section, right? Exact same chords, exact same spacing. And since things are so straightforward, I'm gonna leave you to practice these chords on your own, and let's come over to the melody now and see what's going on with this simple version. And before we start learning this melody together, let me play through this simple version of the melody one more time for you to hear it and get it in your ears a little bit better. Well, if this is your first time coming to this tune, then you probably noticed that there's a really standard fiddle tune structure going on here, right? Like I mentioned before, we have 2 sections, the A section, which comes first, and then the B section. And each of those parts are 8 measures long with repeats. And as there's some similarity between the chords from one part to the next, there's some similarities in the melody as well, and there's some internal repetition within each part that makes it a bit easier to understand and to play. So on the A section here, we have this repeating pattern that happens every 2 measures. You'll notice how the first 2 measures and the next 2 measures start out the exact same way, right? The same is true with measures 5 and 6 on the second line here. It's almost the exact same as the first measure, but then it goes somewhere different towards the end of the phrase. The only phrase that you really have to watch out for are the last two measures here. This is what some people call the turnaround phrase, and it's some new material that kind of resolves the melody and sets us back up to go to the beginning of the A section again. And within this melody here, we just have a couple little embellishments I wanted to tell you about. First up, we have this hammer-on that happens from the 2nd fret of the A string to the 5th fret on that very first measure. That's an embellishment that we're going to use a lot for both versions of this tune, so it's good to spend some time here to make sure that we're playing it right. And if you've never used a hammer-on like this before, the basic idea is to use your left hand to create a new note without using your pick. So we're gonna play a downstroke on the 2nd fret of your A string, and then we're gonna hammer on with your ring finger on the 5th fret of the A string to make that new pitch ring out. And the real challenge is to try to make that second note as clean and sustained as possible. The trick is to make sure that you stick the landing, that your ring finger is landing on that 5th fret and maintaining pressure from the very start of the impact. And in measure 4, we start off with a different hammer on. This one we're hammering on from the open A string to the 2nd fret of the A string, which I think is a little easier. Nice work. So once you feel comfortable with each phrase individually, let's try stitching them all together. I'll play through the A section here once, a bit slower with the transcription on screen, so follow along at your own pace. 1, 2, 3, 4. So coming over to the B section now, and we have this very similar phrase structure of 2-measure phrases, and this melody's even simpler than the A section, I think. Check out this first phrase here. Here's phrase number 2 of the B section. Here we've got that same hammer-on from the open A string to the 2nd fret, exactly like we did in the A section. And check out the third phrase of this B section now, and you'll see that it's pretty much identical to the first phrase of the B as well, right? Pretty easy. And even easier now, this turnaround phrase for the B section is exactly note for note the same as the turnaround phrase for the A section. So you've already learned the entire tune. Congratulations. So let's take a spin on this B section once together as well. Nice. Well, before we come over to the complex version of this melody, let's make sure that this simple version is really cemented into our minds and in our fingers, because we have to see that melody intersect with all the variations that we come up with later. So if you don't know this tune already, let's spend a little bit of time playing through this melody together. I'll play through the entire tune with the repeats with the transcription on screen so you can follow along. 1, 2, 3, 4. All right, on to the fun part where we get to make this melody sound a little bit more interesting, right? Check out this version that I came up with, and then we'll break it down bit by bit. Well, I know some people might think, how on earth is that the exact same tune that we were playing earlier? I know there's a lot different here, and that's kind of the fun part, is taking the skeleton of a melody and making it your own through your own variations and adding in embellishments like this. And if you're new to this process, let me just show you a few of those working parts that I use to make this melody sound a little bit more interesting. All I did was I added in some extra hammer-ons. We used some slides here and there. We used some anticipated syncopated rhythms to change things up a bit. We used some drone strings to fill out the sound a bit, and we also used some double stops to flesh out the sound even more. So that's all that's going on here. And before we dive into these embellishments and variations, let's refamiliarize ourselves with that D major scale. Since we're in the key of D here, these are the notes that we're going to use to add extra bits in between the melody that we learned earlier. So here's an octave and a half of the D major scale, pretty much all the notes that we'll use for this particular arrangement. So you'll notice that here at the beginning of the tune, we have a pickup measure that's anticipating the downbeat. Some people call this a rhythmic push. That's where we have this tied note that carries us across the bar line. So you're really coming in on the fourth beat of the previous measure and letting that carry across to the downbeat of the first measure of the tune. And at the beginning of the phrase, in addition to that rhythmic anticipation, we're also sliding into the 7th fret from the 4th fret on your D string, and we can use our open A string as a drone there as well. If you want to, you can use either your ring finger or your middle finger for the slide, whatever feels comfortable to you. Also, here in the first phrase, we're using some extra drone strings to make the melody sound a bit fuller, right? I'm using an open D string over that hammer-on to flesh out the sound even more. And for a tune like this that's in the key of D major, you can use your open D and your open A strings pretty much at any point in the tune, and it's gonna sound pretty nice. So you can experiment around with even more drones over this tune if you want to. On to the second phrase here, and you see that we're using some of those extra notes on the D major scale to fill in these longer notes that we had from the simple version. And here at the end of the phrase, instead of playing that hammer-on like we did for the simple version, we'll play some double stops to change things up a bit. Nice. Well, on the third phrase, we have another push where we're anticipating the downbeat with our open D and our open A strings. And here in the middle of the phrase, we have a new hammer-on from the E string to our 2nd fret of the E, and the weird thing is we're playing an upstroke with our right hand to make sure that we're alternating at the right consistency with our pick strokes. Also in this third phrase, we're using that open A string as another drone to fill out the sound here. Then leading into the fourth phrase, we're just playing some nearby notes on the major scale to fill in those longer notes even more and to make this be a continuous 8th note melody. Well, I know there's a lot going on there, but when you feel ready, let's try playing through this A section together as well. 1, 2, 3, 4. All right, home stretch here. Let's check out this more complex version of the B section now. To start things off, we have another anticipated downbeat with this slide from the 3rd fret to the 5th fret of your E string, and I'd recommend using your ring finger here. Then on the first phrase of the B here, we're using some open A string drones and some extra notes on the D major scale, again, to fill out that melody a bit more. All right, on the second phrase of the B, we have to use that dreaded 4th finger, right? We're gonna use your pinky on the 7th fret of the E string to play this first part of the phrase. Then just like in the A section, we're using these same double stops to play this melody at the end of the phrase. On the third phrase, we're using another anticipated downbeat slide from the 3rd fret to the 5th fret of the E string, and then this first measure of the line is exactly the same as the beginning, so no problem there. And then beyond that, the last 3 measures of this line are exactly the same as the last 3 measures of the A section as well. So once you're here, you've already learned the entire version. So try all this out, and whenever you're ready, let's play through this B section together as well. All right, so just like we did with that simple version of the melody, let's see if we can play through this entire embellished version to get these working parts in our fingers so that we can use them for other tunes as well. 1, 2, 3, 4. Nice work, folks. I hope this was helpful, and my challenge to you is to see if you can take those same working parts, the hammer-ons, the slides, the anticipated rhythms, the double stops, the extra notes on the scale, and use these elements in another tune that you're working on. Pick a simple melody and see if you can make some complex version of the tune like this. And be sure to head over to Patreon if you want to grab those PDF transcriptions or the backing tracks for any of my lessons here. But thanks so much for watching. Hit like, hit subscribe, and I'll see you in the next one.